Kevin Rudd, thanks for joining us. The federal government is going to be throwing an extra $3.5 billion to extend the fibre reach of the NBN. Surely good news.
This is a monumental policy backflip by the Morrison government, which has spent 7 long years attacking my government's original plan, only now, 7 years later, to begin delivering to Australians what they should have had all along. So, Mr. Morrison deserves no credit whatsoever for this. It's 7 years of lost opportunity for Australia.
You say that money's been wasted in this project. How so?
When we set out to build the national broadband network, we commissioned teams right across Australia to begin digging trenches, laying out the cable, all with one objective, which is to get that fibre optic cable into people's homes or into their business premises. All those teams were then ripped out of action back in 2014, and instead the work was interrupted. And as a consequence, there's a huge waste which occurs through the interruption of a big rollout like that. And now there's a further big waste involved in redeploying all those teams, and in fact, in many cases, building up those teams from scratch. This is a massive waste of taxpayer dollars in terms of lost opportunities on the way through, but also the interruption of the construction process. The Auditor General should have a strong, hard look at this.
Now, while they're coming around to more fibre, there are some big differences between your model and theirs. Labor was envisaging 90 to 93% of premises being connected to fibre. Under this plan, this new plan, it'd be 75%, but they have used multiple technologies. Do you agree that that was your mistake?
When we took advice from the technical expert committee advising the Australian Cabinet at the time, looking at all available technologies, the universal recommendation was the best future-proofing technology was fibre optic cable to the premises. Because at that stage, and still today, we do not know the limitations of the new technologies which are coming onto the market. Therefore, based on that advice, we built what we built. And that was to ensure that Australians had at least 100 megabits per second and capable of upscaling from there. It's just a decade's worth of lost opportunity. It reminds me very much of Morrison's campaign against my government's debt and deficit to keep us out of the recession during the global financial crisis.
The coalition does say, however...
Except that now he borrows 5 times more than we did then. And so, having campaigned also against the reckless spending involved with my government's national broadband network, it seems as if he's now doing much the same, except 7 years late.
Minister Paul Fletcher was saying today that when the coalition came to power in 2013, only 51,000 premises were connected. Do you think that you were too slow?
The National Broadband Network was finalised in 2009. Our first fibre optic cables were rolled out at the end of that year in early 2010. We were making steady progress, and the machine to roll out that fibre optic cable was moving fast right across the country. They brought it to a grinding stop. And one of the reasons they brought it to a grinding stop back then, because of the pressure brought on them by News Corporation, because of the competition which fibre optic to the premises would have delivered then to the Fox Entertainment Network and Murdoch's cable system from new players like Netflix. Well, it's all very fine to sacrifice the national interest to the commercial interests of the Murdoch media, as they did back then. Who pays the price? The Australian taxpayer and the Australian economy.
Do you think the NBN is being fattened up for sale?
Well, we have learnt, unfortunately, that with Mr. Morrison's government, that they don't speak the truth on these matters. They haven't spoken the truth on debt and deficit. They've not spoken the truth on the NBN. And I doubt they'd be speaking the truth on the question of privatisation.
But you wanted to sell the NBN, Mr. Rudd. You wanted to sell the NBN. That was your plan.
My view of the future of the national broadband network, which I was absolutely clear-cut about at the outset, was this: build the infrastructure, get 100 megabits plus per second out to every single premise in the country, or at least 93% of the country that you could physically reach. And then when it has begun to generate its own revenue stream, then privatize it. And the reason for privatizing it would then be to use the revenue you would get from the sale to invest in the next generation of national infrastructure needs that Australia would have.
And what's that?
Well, the unfinished national renewable energy revolution, which our country needs, investing in renewable energy across the country, at scale solar, also ensuring that every residence in the country had solar panels on its roof. And if we did that, let me tell you, we would not be in the position of facing any future crises about baseload power stations within Australia either.
Well, on energy, Kevin Rudd, the government yesterday unveiled its technology investment roadmap. 5 areas of priority investment: hydrogen storage, low carbon steel and aluminium, carbon capture and soil carbon. Are they all good ideas?
Well, the bottom line is if you're going to put out a plan with a view to getting take up from the industry and take up from the economy in general for new energy projects, you should see what a public tendering process produces from the renewable sector and from other new sources of energy supply. I am somewhat sceptical about Mr. Morrison's government beginning to dictate who the winners should be. However, having said that, all these new technologies should be explored and, to the extent possible, deployed in the field. I've long had the view that that is the case with carbon capture and storage, and I've also had the view in relation to hydrogen-based energy options for the future as well.
Lastly, Mr. Rudd, China is saying that it will achieve carbon neutrality before 2060. How does this change the politics of climate?
China is the largest economy in the world by purchasing power parity pricing. More importantly, China is the largest emitter of greenhouse gases in the world. And therefore, for this large economy to now commit to carbon neutrality before 2060, and we hope closer to 2050, places enormous pressure, I should say, on the Morrison government to do the right thing. If the largest economy in the world, namely China, can now commit to coming in with carbon neutrality sometime between 2050 and 2060, then surely Mr. Morrison can at last put his best foot forward and can make that commitment for Australia as well.
Kevin Rudd, thank you so much for your time. Thanks for joining ABC News Channel.
Thanks very much.